when you were standing up in front of some young Christians who have witnessed these sorts of atrocities, and what do you say to them? Do you say it is unfortunate but inevitable that we have to combat violence with violence? I mean, as you know, we've tried in the West to devise, if you like, the just war criteria, things like that, which try and justify violence. Do you ever try, and do you think it's possible for a Christian to justify violence?
Roger, this is a very difficult question. And difficult in the sense that, I mean, so if you are outside, let me say, the war zone, the killing fields, I'll call it, in Nigeria, it's easy to say, well, you know, we can't counter violence with violence. We can't go against what is, you must learn to show love and compassion and dialogue and negotiation and things like that. However, if you're within the context, living in the communities where people are killed every day, where you see mass graves every day, and there are widows and there are children, it becomes a very difficult thing to not jump into the instinctive existential mode where now you believe that unless you carry arms, unless you do anything to defend yourself, and indeed you are right to defend yourself. Indeed.
But you're talking about the difficulty of persuading people not to commit violence.
That's
but
right.
Do you yourself believe? Are you a pacifist?
Roger, let me say, to be honest with you, at some point I went to look for an AK-47. It was so bad when a church near mine, St. Finbar's Church in Rayfield, was bombed. Then my church, that Sunday, the vibration of the bomb rattled all the glasses in my church. It just rattled every ostrich. It just gets to you. It right to your spirit and your soul, and you know that you have to do something or else you get killed. And indeed, on the advice of one of my church leaders, he said, look, Hassan, I have served in the army at some point. We need to get an AK-47 here because we now know the pattern. They come with suicide bombers, approach your church during service. They are wearing vests or they drive in a car. We can bring them down even before they get to the church. And it sounded like a great idea. So yes, I did go to somebody I knew who was in the black market of selling guns in Jos, and I asked how much it would take to get an AK-47. He told me at that time it was going to cost about £1,000, and I couldn't come up with that kind of money.
But you'd, in principle, taken the decision if you could afford it.
If I could afford it, I definitely went for it, Roger.
You see, I think we're all facing these sort of dilemmas, aren't we, as Christians? Which we read the Gospels, and you can read the Gospels and conclude that Jesus was very close, at least, to being a pacifist.
There
are plenty of verses will indicate that, and yet it's like Ukrainians faced with Russian intervention, or ourselves, I suppose, in this country in the Second World War. There's always a point at which you say, most of us say, if we're not Quakers and others, at that point I cease to be, as it were, a pacifist. I have to defend things. But there's no great confidence we have that violence will solve anything, but it might at least stop the situation getting even worse.
Yes. So in my case, that was the thinking, because the only thing I'm sure that stopped me from getting that AK-47 one was because I didn't have the money. However, God, in his own mercy, to perhaps show me that wasn't the way to go, now brought in this little girl as I was sitting in front of my church and she was selling groundnuts. And I asked why she was not in school. And she told me she couldn't afford the school fees because her parents were killed, or rather her dad was killed. So I told her to go tell her mother that I would pay the fees. And this girl started walking away. But somewhere in my mind, I said, well, she's a 7-year-old. She either was not willing to go to school, or she may not tell her mother exactly what I said. So I decided, why don't I go with her and actually see the mom? So it was when I was working with her that now I realized that she was heading towards her home, which was within a Muslim community. Then it dawned on me that she's a Muslim. And at that moment, I couldn't turn back because I was already working with her. I was a pastor wearing a collar. So it was a difficult decision. I mean, it was a split decision, but I decided to go with her anyways. But to cut that long story short, I met the mother, a very lovely woman. She went on her knees in the typical traditional way and thanked me for wanting to help train her child. And she explained to me, she had other children that are unable to go to school. And when the 7-year-old girl was okay, was because they needed to feed. So I said, well, why don't I teach you a skill? And then the children can go to school and then you can earn some living for the family. So that started for me an amazing journey, because suddenly I realized that within the Muslim community, there were other widows that were there that had the same challenge and their children were not in school. So I brought them together, talked with my Archbishop Benjamin Kwashi, and we decided to fund 147 children in school, all Muslims, and then started this training, which for me was an engagement with the Muslim community. And Roger, I must tell you that 1 year down the line, it's such a big blessing, because the love and the care we showed and the relationship we built. This community came one day and they brought this big fat cow on a Christmas Eve and said, Hassan, we have watched you. At first we were apprehensive. We didn't trust what you were doing. We thought it was just a way of converting our women and children. But now we've seen, so I'll quote, he said, we've seen the Christianity that we saw when the missionaries brought religion to Nigeria and they brought Christianity. We saw honesty, we saw commitment, and we saw dedication. We want to thank you.
But you've achieved a tremendous amount there, but you may have to protect it against Boko Haram. Do you protect it with arms? This is the question.
No, not at all. So this is the incredible thing. Now, suddenly, this community that I had related with, an incident happened on a Sunday morning. A young man was walking towards my church with a device. And then the Muslims raised an alarm and the young man was arrested. So the leader of the community now came and called me and said, Reverend, we have nothing to do with this. I said, what are you talking about? He said, look, this device, this young man coming towards the church with a device, he's not in our community. He's perhaps one of those that was radicalized somewhere. But let me promise you this. As long as we live, as long as I'm alive in this community, nothing would happen to your church. You've shown us love and commitment, and we will defend your church with everything that we have. And I felt that come through very powerfully.